take home. In the parasha today, we see the embodiment of norms within actual costume and physical structures. You shall make a breastplate of decision worked into a design, make it in the style of the ephod with gold and purple and crimson yarns, each which have a meaning, and of fine twisted linen. It shall be square and doubled, a span in length and a span in width. It shall have mounted stones in 4 rows of stones. The first row, the stones shall correspond to the names of the tribes of Israel, 12 corresponding to their names, engraved like seals, each with its name, the 12 tribes. In addition, you have 2 small dice made of lapis lazuli, where the 6 faces and the 6 faces of the die, of each die, corresponds also to the names. And those names go onto the shoulder of the priest and also are above the breastplate of decision. So therefore, when there is a divination need among the community, is this the time to go to war or is it not? Is this the time to send people home to harvest, or is it not? What are the big questions facing the community? The high priest is literally bearing the names and the weight of all 12 tribes on his shoulders. So think about that when the person is about to make a judgment that will affect the whole community. High priest is not wearing a baseball cap, by the way, just to put this in perspective. The actual ephod, which they wear, it's a 2-part structure, folded over with the chain and then tied, has the 12 tribes also on it. It's basically, I don't know where we find symbolism like this today in our culture. I think the one place I can think of where the whole community is sort of represented, it's like the high priest wearing a flag, right? It's like having the stars of the states on the American flags and the stripes symbolizing our origins and the tribes, and that the flag means something because it shows that we're all in something together. When the flag just is called a symbol and is not recognized as having the norms within it, we forget ourselves. Increasingly, we find ourselves in a world, I certainly do, where the actual garments of officials and representing these norms and values are viewed not only with suspicion, but probably even more with a form of sometimes contempt. Because the idea is we have seen too often how a priest who wears a collar abuses the position. A justice on the Supreme Court wearing a black robe nevertheless seems to revert just to the debts owed to the person that nominated them and got them on. We've become skeptical of watching these garments worn by people who abuse them. And then for national symbols, where it shows that we're all in this together, we've become even more skeptical because we can see a la George Orwell and in our own time, how those very symbols can be manipulated, and so that they can be trying to sell a message that isn't true and hide misconduct. Nevertheless, my argument for your Shabbos tables today is that we are the poor for throwing out the symbols just because they haven't always properly reflected the norms. I think we are the smaller for having not embracing the meaning of the flag. At the same time, I want to acknowledge that the beauty of what's in Torah is that there was a whole physical and visual language that was not just a mere symbol. Like today, if I want to know what the Pope's hat means, I consult a church historian, right? If I'm trying to look at the garments and objects and crowns in a museum, I'm trying to get an art history person to tell me what each thing means. Well, that symbolizes this, and this is the reason for that. But we have to remember that in the time of Bible, it was an entirely lived language. Let me add just a little bit more to what is going on with these symbols and how they're being lived out loud. So one of the things it says is that the priestly garment cannot be torn. In fact, it's even saying that the opening of the head shall be in the middle of it, the opening shall have a binding of woven work around it, it shall be like the opening of a coat of mail, so that it does not tear. In other places of Torah, the high priest has said they may not tear it on purpose, which also means, as we see in various contexts, that they must postpone personal mourning and personal attention to their own dead and their family until their duties are done. And we will see this come up shortly with the deaths of Nadav and Avihu, and that Aaron must conceal his grief until time that he can take off the uniform, because you're not allowed to tear, which today is done at the funeral, but used to be done at the time that you heard of the death of your loved one. The tearing was part of a larger language of tearing, and it wasn't just about the garment that was worn. So think about the way tearing worked in our ancient culture. The clothes symbolized the social fabric. So the high priest tearing the clothes for a personal loss would be like saying that individual losses rip apart our social fabric, and therefore it defies each person of hope, because the hope is symbolized in the hope garment that, by the way, also can have smudges and stains, because the smudges and stains would symbolize what to people? The neglect of the social fabric. It would symbolize the sins of the people, sullying the community itself. So the whole garments of the high priest kind of symbolized hope for an individual mourner of a return to wholeness among community and a return to a new kind of life following the grief period. In fact, just in terms of the clothes being dirty and absorbing and would show, if the high priest's clothes were dirty, would show the people's sins. There even a reference to a string that hangs down from the high priest's headgear. And it says that that string absorbs any leftover sin from the offerings that people are bringing to the temple, so that all of that's absorbed and the offerings themselves are pure. This especially relates, by the way, to the olive oil, because the olive oil that begins the parasha has to be especially pure, but the olive oil that people bring to the temple does not have to have that level of purity. It is made pure by the absorption of the whole community through that symbolic string. To appreciate the tearing of a garment overall, it's a language that we already see rooted in our biblical figures, right? With Jacob, Job, and David spontaneously rending their garments, or maybe according to their social vocabulary at the time, upon hearing their devastating news. And so in Jewish law, this evolved from a spontaneous outburst to a structured ritual performance that would be performed while standing. So tomorrow at the funeral here, I'll be asking people to stand before they tear. The tear itself represents irreversibility. Just as a garment is damaged, the family unit is no longer whole. For a parent, the tear is made on the heart side, and for all other relatives on the right. To appreciate the gravity of this practice of kriya in the Talmudic period, one must understand the value of textiles. Most people only own 2 sets of clothes, a coarse set for weekday labor and a finer set for Shabbat. For many, a single mantle served as their coat by day and their blanket by night. And therefore, we just read in Parshat Mishpatim that sometimes of the poor, you never allow them to give them your garments in pledge, because garments could be layered, so you have multiple layers that you're wearing. The outside layer was your talit. It was called talit, I should say, and it was kind of like a sarong is, or a sari. It could be used also for sleeping in as blanket, and as I know from Indonesia, as a towel. So because clothing was a primary capital asset, often used as currency or collateral, tearing a garment was a massive financial sacrifice. It was a public declaration that material wealth was meaningless in the face of death. Walking through a community in a ruined, expensive mantle was a powerful social signal that the wearer was in a state of brokenness. And by contrast, that those healing and helping were in a state not of brokenness, but a state of a return to wholeness. It's like the shattering of the glass, that the community is the hope of putting back together, at least all together, us being the parts that make the whole. The process of healing the garment mirrors the stages of mourning. Jewish law distinguishes between 2 types of repair, and I've mentioned them before. There's mulal. After the 7 days of Shiva, a mourner may do mulal, the rough stitching up of the tear. With poor taste, the only thing I ever think of is the way Frankenstein looks in the movies. So it's the wide stitches. The stitches are meant and required to be jagged and obvious, signaling that the person is beginning to rejoin society at the end of Shiva, but remain scarred and vulnerable. For most relatives, except for parents, at the Shloshim period, one does ichui, tight stitches. That would be a repair that could actually look invisible from afar, but is, it's the best repair you can do in the truly tight stitches. And this represents the point where the wound has closed, but the scar remains. There is the parental exception. In honor of a parent, the tear may never be perfectly mended with lichui. It can only remain roughly stitched, ensuring the scar remains a permanent testament to the unique bond and the irreparable nature of that specific loss. So there was a whole language of clothes, from the very clothes you wore. It had to do with the norms that we have about borrowing and lending in the poor. It had to do with the social signals. So when you returned to work, when you returned to society, people could see. It showed that no matter how wealthy you were, and you could have the most expensive silk clothes that the Mideast could furnish, nevertheless, you're immortal like the rest of us and part of the human race. So you have tears and sewings up. It symbolizes that we're all equal under God. I feel that we've lost our tribal languages. I love this parsha. I wish we lived in a world like that again. I mean, like I said, to now it's more like if you actually wore something, people would be like, oh, I need the Wikipedia entry to explain the symbolism of what you wore. But it was meant to be another language, a visual language, and as the parsha says, a language of zikaron, the language of remembering for a purpose. In fact, it says that while wearing all the 12 tribes, the person making the decision, it's zikaron. Remember the effect of your decision on all of these 12 tribes. And it says in the parsha, it's a zikaron for God, just as at Rosh Hashanah with zichronot. By showing the names of the ancestors to God during these grave moments of decision, you're asking God to remember the merits of the ancestors, the sacrifices they made, which is also a zikaron to the person making that plea on Rosh Hashanah and with the breastplate of decision, that we may not always continue to write checks on the bank account whose content was made by our ancestors' deposits. I miss a visual language that connects us all. I miss the fact that Supreme Court justices should be not wearing jeans and sneakers, but they should put on the robe and have a zikaron about what they are called to do. I think that more of us should be wearing our uniforms. I think that rabbis sometimes, instead of branding themselves, I think I should be wearing a garment that has embroidered on it the names of every single member of Beth Israel. I'm serious, because I feel that way. I really feel like, because if I'm saying what norm belongs on the garment, because it's norms, it's not like art history symbols. Like that's what we need when we can't decipher anything. That's not the language. The language is the norms embedded in it. So for me, like I literally try to think when I come up and I'm trying to say something inarticulate about Israel, or I'm trying to make a decision, or I'm trying to have a meeting with the board, I literally try to feel like, what's the 480 member units of Beth Israel, like how do I properly represent them? I should probably have their names embroidered on a garment. That way you could never leave the congregation, because then I'd have to get a new talit. So I'd be like, look, don't leave yet. I got to keep wearing this, so your name's still on it. If in our society we had that visual language, what are the norms today that we would want to be fabricated and embroidered into them for the right kinds of reminders that we need? Shabbat Shalom. Musaf Amidah begins on page 184. Please rise.